Schneider. I live in Fullerton. My son lives in Tustin. And I'm very grateful that Rabbi invited us for me to share with you my very personal story. I'm not going to discuss the Holocaust in general. You can read about that in history books. I am just going to share with you my personal experience. I am 93 years old, and my first awareness that bias and persecution exist happened when I was 8 years old. I was in second grade in a Jewish day school in Bratislava, Slovakia, my hometown. One day, my mother pinned a Mogen David, a yellow Star of David, on my jacket. And I asked her why, and she said, because we're Jewish. It was the first time that I became aware of being different. And not only did she pin the star on me, but she told me from now on, we're gonna have to be very careful when we walk in the streets. I should try to always walk next to the buildings, because in Slovakia now it's okay, since you're wearing a Jewish star, if somebody wants to hit you, if somebody wants to trip you up, if somebody wants to spit on you, it's okay because we are Jewish. About a year later, the doorbell rang, and there were some men in uniform at the door, and I overheard them talking to my parents. And my parents were told that they had 24 hours to vacate their home. They can take with them only what fits into suitcases. All the furniture, all the artwork, everything stays. On the same day, my father's business was taken away. A Christian manager was put in place. So within 24 hours, my parents lost all their possessions, and my father lost his livelihood. My father, fortunately, was in the import-export business, so I learned later he had some money in foreign countries, and we could go on living because my father couldn't work from then on. That was in 1941, 42. Things got worse. We lived in one room. My parents, for the next 3 years, never had privacy, nor did I. But we were safe. Within a number of months, things started to go downhill for Jewish people, and Jews started to be picked up off the street and sent to concentration camps. Somehow my parents knew about concentration camps, and they said we needed to do everything we could not to get arrested. My parents arranged for us to be smuggled to Hungary, which was the country just south of Slovakia, when things got really bad. And I remember sitting by my parents' feet in a darkened car, and my mother admonishing me not to say anything, not to cough, not to sneeze until we get through the border, because we would be arrested. We successfully made it across the border, and we got to Budapest, where my grandparents lived in Hungary. And my parents had several friends. And again, we moved into a one room in somebody's home. I could not go to school because they didn't trust their 9-year-old not to give us away. So from the time I was 9 until after liberation, I had no formal schooling, and my father could not work. Things in Hungary were quite good for a number of months. And in the spring of 1944, the Germans marched into Hungary, and suddenly things became very, very difficult for Jewish people. If any of you go to Budapest, there is a very poignant memorial of numbers of pairs of shoes in brass lined up at the banks of the Danube River, because they started rounding up Jewish people and lining them up at the Danube and just shooting them into the river. So things became quite difficult, and one day my father didn't come home, and my mother kind of knew that he must have been arrested. And she felt we couldn't stay any longer in case they tried to find us and they beat it out of my father as to where we were. My mother arranged for us now to be smuggled back to Slovakia, to a small town called Nitra, where I was actually born. I had an uncle living there who was married to a Christian lady, so at that point he was still safe. And this time we didn't go by car. This time we walked from a farmhouse in Hungary north to a farmhouse in Slovakia, and during the night we walked through cornfields. We got to Nitra, and my uncle was working in a brewery that apparently was owned by a Swiss company, because its manager was a Swiss man named Siegenthaler. And Mr. Siegenthaler, a righteous Gentile, at great danger to his own person, agreed to hide my mother and me. He hid us in a very secure place, but in a very, very awful place. He hid us in the attic of this brewery. It was an attic with no furniture, with sawdust on the floor, no windows, no manner of heating equipment, and what was the worst, no bathroom facility. But my mother made it livable. We were there for 4 months, and my mother arranged it so that one end of this space was our bathroom, and we would use that area, and then we would cover things up with sawdust. We shared the space with mice and rats. I did have books. I had crayons. I remember doing a lot of drawing. My mother had books to read. As I said, she made it possible for us to exist. Once a week, Mr. Siegenthaler, during the dead of night, would come up the stairs to our attic and take us down to his home, which was on the premises. And once we got to his home, we would get a warm shower, and we would have our once a week warm meal. Unfortunately, on one of those visits, the doorbell rang. The police were there. They were told that there were 2 Jewish women in the house, and we were arrested and we were taken away. This was in middle of October of 1944. I might tell you that I owe my survival to 3 miracles, and I will tell you what had happened. The date of our arrest was very important, because we were imprisoned in Nitra for 2 weeks, and then we were taken down the main street of Nitra to the train station and loaded onto the proverbial cattle cars. We were taken to Auschwitz via a little town called Szeged, which is also important in my story. And we got to Auschwitz on November 3rd. We were taken off the trains. During the train ride, my mother told me what awaited us, and she literally prepared me to die because I was 11 years old. She said, if anybody asks, you tell them you're 15 and you can work, and I'll make myself younger, and I'll say I can work, and we are not mother and daughter, we are sisters. They took us off the train, and interestingly, there was no selection. My mother had expected there to be a selection. She knew about the Dr. Mengele, and she knew that people who were put to work would go on one side, and the elderly and the children would go to the other side, and that other side would directly go to the gas chambers. So there was no selection, but we were marched to...
Sorry to interrupt. Try to bring it closer to your mouth.
Can you hear me better? Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you. At any rate, we were marched to a building with an enormous chimney, which my mother identified as the crematorium, where they would burn the bodies that were gassed. We got to the crematorium, and we were ushered into an enormous area, much like a warehouse, with just SS soldiers and guards standing around. There were hundreds of us, and we were told to take off all our clothes, everything that was on our bodies, women to take off their wedding bands, if they wore earrings, take them off and drop everything where we were standing. At the end of one wall, there was a very large steel door, and I kind of, in my mind, anticipated that's where the end would come. But the end didn't come, because we were lined up and single file, we were marched towards those doors, but on the way, we had to stop at a table where they shaved our heads, and they shaved the women's body hair. And my mother whispered to me, she said, why would they do that if we're not going to live? And then we walked some more steps, and we were stopped at a station where they put a tattoo on our arms. And at that point, my mother whispered to me, she said, my darling, we're going to live. They would not give us a number if we were going into the gas chambers. We went through those doors, and it was exactly the way my mother had described. It would be a very huge area with shower heads above, and the door closed, and water came out of the showers, and no gas. That was my first miracle. Unbeknownst to us, some young people, Jewish workers, prisoners, who were part of the Sonderkommando. The Sonderkommando were young people in Auschwitz who had the god-awfulest job of loading dead bodies into the ovens. Some members of the Sonderkommando got a hold of some explosives. They planted those explosives in one of the crematoria, and they blew up the crematorium. All of them were shot for this. But on November 1st, the Germans decided that maybe they should stop gassing in case word should get out to the rest of the world as to what went on. And the history books tell us that the first transport that did not go into the gas chamber was a transport from Szeged, arriving on November 3rd. That was my first miracle. My mother and I were told to put on clothes. Of course, we didn't end up where we started, so we had somebody else's clothes at our feet. And she just told me, put on as many clothes as you can. It is November in Poland. It's going to get very, very cold. So put on as many layers as you can, and I did. Mother and I were taken to our barracks, which in our case was, we were on a top barrack, and we were sleeping 6 women on a cot. We did not have a mattress, but we did have a blanket for the 6 of us to share. The routine was very boring and the same every day. We would be awakened very early in the morning. We had to get dressed or undressed, as the case may be, and we had to line up in front of the barracks, no matter if it was snowing or raining or freezing cold, and they would count us. Several weeks into this routine, during the counting, during the appel, it was called, which is a calling in French. During this appel, they called out several women's names, including my mother, and they took my mother away. Before my mother left, though, she was standing next to me and she said in a very low voice, "Unless they hang me or shoot me, I will try to survive, and you must do the same." So they took my mother away, and here I was, 11 years old, totally by myself, with nobody to ask, nobody to talk to, nobody to hug goodnight, but I managed. I spent several months there, actually about 6 weeks, and in January we started hearing rumors that Russian soldiers may be nearing Auschwitz and we may just maybe be liberated. But that was not to be for us, because they lined us up and they counted us, and then they told us to line up about 100 feet away, and we were going to be marched to Germany. Now, mind you, I had been there for 3 months. Sorry?
The microphone. Just wait.
Okay, can you hear me better now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. At any rate, my mother had been taken away, and I was left to my own devices. A second miracle happened on this march. By the way, I was on the march for 6 days before we were put on in some more cattle cars. A miracle happened as I was walking, dragging myself, often ready to give up. You either, if you gave up, then if they were merciful, they would shoot you. If not, then you would lie down on the floor, on the ground, and you would freeze to death in the next day or two. At any rate, as I'm marching, I am walking at the very edge of this mass of people. History books said that there were 7,000 people who started and 3,000 who finished. At any rate, I'm walking at the very edge of this mass of humanity when out of nowhere, a young SS soldier with a gun slung over his shoulder approached me. He leaned down and he said to me, "I'm going to give you something that will help." And he put a little brown paper bag in my hands, and as fast as he appeared, he disappeared. I couldn't say anything. I I was in shock. I opened this little bag, and in it was powdered sugar. And even my little 11-year-old mind kind of knew that sugar was good for you. And so it lasted me about a day. I would wet my fingers, I'd reach into the bag, and then I would lick my fingers. And I ate that entire bag of sugar. And I call it a miracle because I don't know whether it was an act of such kindness, literally in hell, or whether the sugar actually gave me the energy to go on. But I was able to go on. And ultimately, after the 6th day, we had made it to the Czech Republic, and we were put on yet another set of cattle cars. And this time it was already middle of November or later. No, it was beginning of February or beginning of January, and very, very cold. And the cattle cars were open, no roof. We were in those cattle cars for 3 days. It was a very difficult 3 days, as you can imagine. And we got, after the 3rd day, we stopped in yet another concentration camp called Mauthausen. And Mauthausen was in Austria. So we had made it from Poland, the Czech Republic, into Austria. And Mauthausen, unfortunately, was also an extermination camp. It also had gas chambers, but Mauthausen went one better. It had gas chambers on wheels. There were little vans, and they would load up with people, and they would turn on the gas, and then they would go wherever they would dump those bodies. It was also home to a quarry, and many, many, many of the workers died there because they had to carry these very heavy boulders and stones up stairs, and everybody physically was so weak that many of them died. In Auschwitz, I was taken off the cattle car, and the first thing I saw was an enormous pile of dead bodies. And it's been 80 years since this happened, and I still see that pile of dead bodies in front of me. I remember a young boy's body on top, eyes wide open, staring at me as I got off the cattle car. I went with the other people who were removed from the cattle cars. We had to jump off. And as I'm walking towards the barracks where everybody else was walking, an SS guard taps me on the shoulder and said, you come with me. I had no idea where we were going. I couldn't ask. I had to do what he told me. I had no idea what awaited me. I went with him, and he knocked on the door of a barracks, and the door opened, and a blonde woman in regular clothes, which I had not seen since I got to Auschwitz, opened the door with a smile, and she said, "Welcome." And I looked into a barracks that was well lit, that was warm, where people smiled, where people looked well fed. And the guard pushed me in and he says, "You go with her." Well, I went in, And I remember the details very clearly. The woman said, "My goodness, we're going to have to get you out of these rags, and we're going to have to give you a bath, and we're going to have to wash your head because I can see that you've got lice." And she did exactly as she said she would. And another woman came, and the two of them took me to where there was a bathtub, and I was given a bath, and I was given fresh clothes. This time I had actual prisoner's uniform with the stripes, which I did not get in Auschwitz. And while they were cleansing me and prepping me, I kind of found out where I was and what was expected of me and what awaited me. I was taken to the brothel in Mauthausen. I was 11 years old. I was a very innocent, very protected child, but whatever they said must have opened my eyes, because I became terribly, terribly frightened of what awaited me. By then I had seen so much death that I was prepared to die, but I was not prepared for what awaited me there. They fed me, which I had not been fed before, and I slept on a bed with this woman, the first woman who let me in. I slept on a mattress, and there was a warm blanket, and I couldn't sleep thinking about what awaited me. And the next morning I was given breakfast, and I got dressed, and a guard came for me, and I was taken to the camp doctor. You do not want to go to a doctor in a concentration camp. I was always afterwards reminded of Frankenstein's laboratory. At any rate, I was taken to the doctor, and I was examined as thoroughly as an 11-year-old child could be examined. And at that point, I didn't think I stood to lose anything, and I was standing naked in front of him, and I got on my knees, and I said, "I'm an 11-year-old child. Look at me, you can count my ribs." I mean, my ribs were showing. I said, "Take pity on me, don't send me back there." But he told me to put on my clothes, and he did send me back. And I slept one more night with this lady, the blonde lady. And the next morning there was a knock on the door, and there was a guard telling them that he came to get me. And this was my third miracle. Apparently the doctor did take pity on me. I did not have to stay at the brothel. I was taken to some buses where there were other women, other prisoners, and we were taken to a subcamp of Mauthausen called Lenzing, which was a work camp, not an extermination camp. In Lenzing, there were a couple of factories where the women prisoners worked. We did not live in barracks. We lived in a bombed-out factory. We had no windows, but certainly it was far, far better than anything I had experienced before. There were women of many nationalities there. there were lots of Russian women, not Jewish women, Russian women who were captured when they fought in the mountains. They were called the partisans. We had mostly women, SS women, supervising us. They were quite cruel. We were beaten quite often, but conditions were 100% better than they had been in the concentration camps. And I experienced even a moment's kindness there. I celebrated my 12th birthday in February in Lansing, and that morning I found a slice of bread with marmalade at my cot when I woke up. And so one of the SS women, knowing that was my birthday, treated me to a slice of bread with marmalade, which I had not seen since I was captured. We worked, and we were fed meager rations. Some women were still dying. I was, at that point, with only women, no men in this camp. And but time went by, and spring came, and towards the end of April, we started hearing rumors that the Allies had landed at Normandy, and they were working their way east, and maybe our camp would be liberated, that some camps in Western Germany had been liberated already. On May 4th, I remember the date distinctly. I remember looking outside, and I remember one of our SS women going into the bushes as an SS woman and came out in civilian clothes. And that kind of gave me the idea that the rumors maybe are true, and maybe we would be liberated. By the time we were liberated, there was not a single guard left in our camp. On May 5th, in the morning, we all gathered outside, and our factory where we lived was situated at the foot of a mountain. I mean, it was a tall hill. It was not really a mountain, and we could see the road above. And at one point on May 5th, we saw a Jeep, which we didn't recognize as a Jeep, but I knew it later. A Jeep stopped right above us, and 3 men in uniform, which turned out to be a GI, a Frenchman, and a Brit, came running down the hill yelling, "You're free!" And that was the first liberation. Several hours later, I saw what to me was a god, a member of U.S. Third Army. We had 2 entrances to the courtyard, and I saw a GI with helmet, with gun drawn, with a silver ID bracelet glistening in the sun, coming into our camp. And he was my first liberator. We were kept in Austria. I was kept there for about a month. We were taken to a town called Linz, which is on a lovely lake. And we got clothes, of course, ill-fitting clothes, but we got clothes nevertheless, and they fed us. And they examined us, and I found out that I weighed 52 pounds. And I would go and walk around and try to remember my parents, whether they had survived. I had no idea, of course. And to tell you what an experience like this does to a person, I could not remember what my parents looked like. And I remember trying very hard to conjure up their image, and I couldn't. I also, mind you, for 7 months, did not brush my teeth. There was no way of personal hygiene. And I had lived in the same clothes for 3 months until in Mauthausen I got the change of clothes. And I lived in those clothes, and I slept in those clothes, and those clothes were never washed. So no wonder that I had lice all over. At any rate, in Linz, one day they collected all the people from Bratislava, from my hometown in Slovakia, and they put us on a train. And they sent us back to our hometown. None of us knew if we would find anybody alive. We didn't know what was going to happen to us, but the first place they made us go to, they actually escorted us, was a building where you had to register all the people who came back from the camps, had to register because thousands of families were looking for loved ones, and at least they could track those that came back. I went to this building with the others, and I went up to the first landing, up the stairs, and I saw a man who looked familiar to me, but I had no idea who he was, so I brazenly walked up to him and I said, "I am Eva Rosenbaum. Do you know me?" And it turned out to be a close friend of my father's. And he told me my father survived. I still break up when I think about it. At any rate, he took me to my father's office. And I might also tell you that my father got his business back. The manager who was put in charge of his business was another righteous Gentile who returned the business to him when my father came back. After my father was arrested, he bought his way out of the first prison he was taken to. In those days, everybody we knew had some money hidden on their person. And my father had some gold coins hidden in the shoulder pads of his suit. And the feeling was that maybe you can pay off a doctor or a guard or somebody and you maybe can get out. And my father, fortunately, was able to do that. And he was released, and he spent the rest of the war hidden by Jesuit priests in their monastery with 40 or 50 other Jewish men. So this gentleman, my father's friend, took me to my father's office. My father wasn't there. He had a male secretary who said my father was in some restaurant having lunch, and we should wait, he'll go get him. And my father always said that where he was having lunch, Mr. Malskop, the name of the secretary, came running in yelling, "Mr. Rosenbaum, the young lady has come home." Well, my father never expected to get me back. I had a cousin, Susan, who was 4 years older than I was, and my father was sure that it was Susan. But when he got back to his office, it turned out to be Eva. We had a very tearful, very poignant reunion. And my father already had a letter from my mother that she also survived. and she survived. She was taken from Auschwitz to Bergen-Belsen, and she survived there working in a factory that made parts for airplanes. And afterwards, she always joked that Hitler lost the war because she made the parts for his planes. Shortly after I returned home, several weeks later, before my mother got home, I came down with typhoid fever, and I was in a coma for several weeks. So I don't remember my mother returning. She came back while I was not conscious. The only hospital that would take care of me was a Catholic hospital, the Sisters of St. Elizabeth, because I was so highly contagious. No other hospital would have me, but they did. And they nursed me back to health, and they prayed for me, and I made it. And that September, I went back to school. And my father sat my mother and me down, and he said, "You have survived hell. God gave you a new life. Now go and make the best of it." And that's what I have tried to do. And I think I was destined to survive. I lost my husband 3 years ago. We were married 68 years. In our religion, we say l'ador vador, from generation to generation. And we have 2 fabulous sons. I have 4 amazing grandsons, and now I have 2 precious great-granddaughters. And that's why I think that God intended for me to live so they might live. Thank you.
Four marriages.
Some of my friends, it is.
At this time, I'd like to call upon the Tolerance Center Executive Director, Michelle Gold, to please come up for a Q&A. And thank God the mic is much better, right?
Amazing. Okay. Thank you.
Do we share a mic?
I think we're going to share for now.
Okay.
Sharing is caring. We're going to share this
The
mic.
sharing is good.
Thank you. Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm Michelle Gold. I'm the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. I've actually just come back from Poland. About 8 days ago, I took a delegation for March of the Living, which I have done for the past 5 years. You're unbelievable. It's such an honor and a privilege to sit with you.
Thank
and
you.
to hear your story is an absolute privilege.
Thank you.
So thank you for sharing your story with us. I'll never forget it. I'm sure none of us will ever forget it. And Peter, what a joy to see you again. So Peter and my husband Larry worked together at UC Irvine for how many years? Many years. Many years. And I came in this evening and I saw you and
We knew each other,
we
but
knew each other. I knew you. Then I saw you in the distance, and it's just wonderful, really, absolutely wonderful. I just wish Larry was here to see you. But now we have to get together, and we will. And if I may, I have a few questions
sure.
to ask you. And the first question is, how did the Holocaust influence your faith? And can you say it strengthened your faith or it weakened your faith?
It absolutely strengthened my faith. When I was in school, I went to boarding school several years later while we waited for our quota to come to the United States. And while there, I was away from my parents, and I kind of, at age 14, 15, could do whatever I wanted to, I felt. And so I explored other religions. I talked to people. I read about the religions. I kind of wondered, should I make a change, having suffered so much for being Jewish? And I did this for about a year, very seriously, studying it. And at the end, I said, there is no way I can be anything but Jewish. And in my heart of hearts, I was born a Jew and I will die such. And it strengthened my faith in that God is with you wherever you are, and I've been helped to survive, and I deeply, deeply believe in a higher power, and nothing has changed that.
Thank you. How did you start your life again after the Holocaust? What was your experience when you first came to the United States?
My parents were very, very strong, optimistic people. I was never allowed to be a martyr. Martyrdom did not exist in our family. I just was told to go forward, as my father said. I was given a new life, now go make the best of it. And that's what I did. And I went back to school, and I managed just fine. And an 11-year-old child has such resilience. I think we don't realize, nowadays when something happens and they bring out the trauma teams and such, an 11-year-old child is able to survive an awful lot of things, and we can draw, especially if we have faith, we have a lot to draw on.
My next question for you is, when did you begin speaking about the Holocaust, and why did you decide to speak and share your story?
My rabbi in Tustin heard about my story, and he said about 4 or 5 years ago, why don't you share your story? And I had not talked about it, period. It was in the past, and it was not something that I ever dealt with. And once he brought up that subject, I thought about it, and I realized that mine is a generation that is diminishing in numbers. And if I'm ever going to share my story, now is the time. And so about 5 years ago, I started speaking about it, and I now do 5, 6 talks a month.
Amazing. That's amazing. When are you available to speak? Education Centre.
I was in Murrieta. Yesterday.
Amazing. Will you come tomorrow? Amazing. Somebody in our audience has asked, did your unfortunate circumstances growing up affect your future decisions as a parent?
Gee, that's a question was never asked before. To give my children all the love I can give, and the best guidance that I can give, and teach them not to sweat the small stuff, because that's the only way to live, because worrying about little things ends up destroying you. And I was grateful every day, or I still am grateful every day. And I say my Modi Ani Lefanecho every morning, and I try to teach my children the same.
And with anti-Semitism at its worst, most probably since the Holocaust, what do you believe we can do to fight hatred, racism, and anti-Semitism?
I frankly never thought I would live to see what I see. I think we have to be proud of who we are. We have to send the message that we are good people, we are productive people. When I speak to high schools and universities, I often quote all the things that add to people's well-being that were either developed or invented by Jews, from the Salk vaccine